I think this is an answer we can build on as we go along, because one of the things we're trying to do here is to identify in these areas of new technology exactly what can be done by international bodies in the form of global governance to prevent these kind of catastrophes. So I want to go next to the technology of cybersecurity and cyberspace. I have to tell you, I'm a little more interested in this subject this week than I was last week, because this week I became the victim of identity theft through the internet for the first time in my life. I think I joined a huge crowd. So tell us what trustworthy computing is, what Microsoft's role in it is, and how you see the threats that are posed.
Well, it's actually very interesting when I was asked to be on a panel that merged technology and nuclear, because, you know, technology continues to surprise me in how it relates to almost everything else in human society. The Microsoft Trustworthy Computing Initiative was about building secure, private, and reliable software. Our chairman, Bill Gates, about 10 years ago, actually 10-year anniversary on January 15th coming up, said that if technology was going to be successfully embedded in every aspect of our lives, it had to be secure, private, and reliable. It had to be as dependable as energy, dependable as the telephone. But of course, technology wasn't. The interesting parallel with nuclear is actually a few. First of all, the internet was actually built to withstand nuclear attack. That's why it was designed by the US military. Its predecessor, the ARPANET, was designed so that if a nuclear bomb took out a city, communications would just route around it. 40 years later, you see software being used to cripple centrifuges at a plant that is used to make nuclear material. So built to avoid nuclear attack, used to potentially avoid nuclear proliferation. And the other interesting thing is that if there is some sort of cataclysmic event, it is increasingly clear to people that the internet will be a major part of any response process. And the reason for that is when you think about major catastrophes today, like Katrina or what happened in Japan, the wireline and cellular networks very quickly get overloaded. But additionally, the traditional networks allow first responders to engage in voice communications. But the internet actually provides a much richer environment. So one of the problems when the Katrina hurricane hit the United States was that there was so much flooding in New Orleans, a lot of the street signs were underwater, and people trying to respond, even in boats, didn't know where they were. But of course, if you didn't just think about having your cell phone, but rather a smartphone, you would not only have voice communications, but data communications, mapping services, GPS location data, and suddenly when first responders go to respond, they can look at a handheld device, see where they are relative to other things that are around, engage in communications on the same device. And so the internet's going to play a huge role in both protecting people when there are cataclysmic events, but also a huge role as we think about how we adjust to all these new crises. And the one other thing I would say is there has been a lot of rhetoric over the years that terrorists will take down the internet. In my view, that is a very hyped statement and is not supported by the facts. First of all, the internet is not one network. It is a network of networks. And in fact, terrorist organizations use the internet for communications, fundraising, and other things. Second, it's actually very hard to take down the internet because it's massively distributed and not governed from any central source. That doesn't mean that organizations will not attack parts of the internet, like the banking system or the power grid or some subset, in order to cause damage. And one of the big challenges we have on the internet, and I'll end my opening remarks with this, is that there are a lot of different actors with a lot of different motives on the internet. You have cyber criminals, you have terrorist organizations, you have nation states engaging in cyber espionage and potentially cyber warfare. And the problem is, while you have all these different actors with all these different motives, the attacks look the same. Bits are bits, packets are packets. So in the traditional world, if someone went into a bank to rob it, I could tell you it's probably a criminal and his motive is probably money, right? And if you saw a fighter jet take down a civilian jetliner, which once happened years ago, you knew it was nation-state activity. Why? Because civilians don't have access to fighter jets. But everyone has access to computers, everyone has access to the internet, and so you have an asymmetric warfare problem. And because it's so hard to know where the attack is coming from, a denial of service attack on a government or on a bank could be anything from an organized activity to a lone actor to a nation-state activity. And it's very hard to do attribution.
Scott, Director General Amano had to deal with a real nightmare this year in Fukushima. Describe for us what your nightmare is in the cyber world. What's a plausible but currently unimaginable almost disaster?
Well, I think the biggest thing that people need to start to appreciate in more detail is the internet is now connecting everyone's life. It is the social fabric. So when computers first came out, the personal computers first came out, the idea was that there'd be a computer on the desktop. You know, everyone's home and desk would have a computer. But it was really embraced because of cost by enterprises to drive work productivity. Today, of course, and you could see this with the Arab Spring, people are using communications technologies in every aspect of their life all the time. And as a result of that, what has happened is we have gotten rid of the systems that would support regular human activity in the absence of the availability of machines. So, for example, if you go for health care, if the computers are gone, there may be no paper records. I'll give you a real-life example of this. I was on a Defense Science Board task force on software assurance in the United States. And, many governments, sophisticated militaries in the world, have something akin to Blue Force tracking. Basically, all your equipment and your people have chips, and you have colors, and you can look at these maps, and if it's red, it's the enemy, and if it's blue, it's you. And someone said to me, the worst thing that could happen is someone could switch the colors. And I said, actually, that's not the worst thing that will happen. You'll only shoot your own people once. Then you will know that your data's not good. The problem is no one has binoculars anymore. If you remember the old movies about World War II, the generals would stand in the hills with the binoculars and see where everyone was. Well, no one's carrying binoculars, and the medical professionals don't have paper records anymore. We have become so dependent on technology, and we have not maintained fallback systems. What would be the worst-case scenario? Well, if the power grid goes out, then everything else fails. If telecom goes out, then there's a cascading effect on the banks. There are many.